Open source is the way. I'm a pretty fast developer. It's a bit of a shame. Web users are just really fantastic at it. Like companies just want people who are versatile. App development frameworks have always been like for apps. I quit that job and joined Expo. People are like, this is incredible. And reach outside of your comfort zone, talk to people. I get a little excited about it.
Today at React Summit, the biggest React conference worldwide, we are joined by Evan Bacon, creator of Expo Router and manager of DevTools and the web platform at Expo. Before launching his tech career, Evan was an award-winning Lego artist, known for his impressive life-size sculptures. His journey into technology began in 2017 with the Expo project, aimed at simplifying mobile app creation and sharing. Today, he's focused on building Expo Router, a universal React framework. We'll discuss the key skills for today's mobile developers, his plans for Expo Router, and the future of web and mobile development. My name is Dan, I'm a mobile software engineer with close to 10 years of experience and also a content creator on Instagram and YouTube, posting about mobile app development and software engineering in general. So let's jump into our conversation. Evan, thank you for coming here.
Yeah.
I'm Dan. My background is in mobile app development, native and also some cross-platform.
Fantastic.
Happy to have you here, and let's talk a bit about mobile app development.
Yeah.
It's been an exciting journey in mobile app development, and over time it became like more exciting but also more complicated, maybe due to also like many frameworks appearing and also web apps becoming more and more capable. And I'd like to start by asking you the eternal question: what do you think about native versus cross-platform mobile app development?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Cross-platform is more of like it's like a workflow, right? Like how you're building your application. When you say native, my mind goes to how React Native is truly native. So React Native is essentially a native framework. So if you need to do a bunch of things, like if you have, for instance, a web framework, maybe the framework will, indicate how you fetch data, how you render things, how you do routing. React Native is very similar to iOS and Android. And actually prioritizes like native capability over being cross-platform. Like cross-platform is very secondary in React Native compared to something like a web view-based approach, for example, where you're drawing DOM to the screen, so it will definitely look and feel the same regardless of platform. Whereas Expo and React Native, if you were to render like, a scroll view, it will scroll like how it should on iOS, and it will scroll differently on Android. At that point, it's more like think about like networking tools that are just written individually for a single platform. Something like Firebase comes to mind. It's like the API ends up looking very similar across different platforms, but it is like individually written for that single platform. So in my mind, there's kind of like maybe three categories, which is like native, like frameworkless native, and then native with a framework. Because if you aren't using React Native, what I've found from like App Store analysis is you'll end up, if it's an app that does a lot of networking, you'll pull in a networking library like AlamoFi or AF networking, right? And so in React Native, you wouldn't do that. You just reach for fetch, which is like the built-in network. So you end up kind of building your own framework if you're not using an established one. And the way I see it is in the future, I think established ones will be, just so established, and they'll handle so many cases that people will, and I mean, we already see this today, tons of apps are written in React Native. They'll reach for an established framework, and then they'll incrementally, peel back the layers and replace things with, custom values. But there's still a lot of people who use frameworkless native, and they just, craft their own solution as they go. And very valid way to make an app.
Right, and I really like your answer, like how you see it in three categories, because people usually like to put them into two categories, like,
Yeah.
all right, native iOS and Android, and then cross-platform, which is like React Native and Flutter and Kotlin multi-platform recently, but
Yeah, I think generally those groupings maybe come from a place of like what the first party company told us to use, and then there's things that other developers have contributed. Like in the early days of iOS, right, there was like no package manager. You had like CocoaPods and Carthage,
yes.
and then tools like Fastlane, and so some tools I think do, like even though they are community tools, they do kind of find their way back into the frameworkless native where people like just go for the first party tools. But even then, it's always still a battle. I mean, the web kind of has a little bit of that, but it's not as bad, right? Like where in the web, there's not too many vendors who are just like only write websites this one way and like don't use like open source tools. This is another thing is that this framework's like React Native, totally open source, whereas like UIKit not so open
No, no.
source and makes it harder to debug, like behavioral issues.
Exactly. And I've also like run into some behavioral issues like this, like you mentioned, where you can't really look what happens under the hood with a VStack in SwiftUI or
Yeah. It's a bit of a shame. Not for like just because it's like such a beautiful set of components that they've crafted.
yes.
It'll be like so educational to be able to actually see like, as a SwiftUI developer, like here's the framework. Because you'll do that and you'll see, like in a gradient, you'll see like probably a metal shader. And you'll be
Yes.
like, that's okay, metal's very important. If I want to do something like this, I need to learn metal and make my own shaders and
And here's an example of how to do that or
exactly.
Mhm.
And so I think that's kind of lost. I don't know. Open source is the way. I'm a firm believer in it.
Yeah, I agree with that. Considering this, how do you see the upcoming like months and years in mobile app development? People like choosing between technologies and
Yeah, fantastic question. How do I see upcoming months and years? I mean, seeing really great growth. And so I do some like app store analysis. What I've seen is that a lot of larger apps will use React Native. I think because it just fits so well with the brownfield story and being able to like compose and drop out whenever you need. And then there's, still lots of other framework usage from things like SwiftUI is really popular right now.
yeah.
And especially with the addition of new platforms like Vision OS, and it's like there's some uncertainty, where will it land? And so, until React Native has like a good vision story or vision becomes like better running other apps or people realize they don't need to develop for it, there will be like that and then they'll like create some demand in that section.
Yes.
So all right, a very complex question. I went down a very specific rabbit hole, but I think something that I think will change a lot in the coming years is historically app development frameworks have always been like for apps. But
Mm-hmm.
if you look at the web space, you'll see that there are different frameworks which are better at different types of websites. And I think like app development frameworks will narrow down on the types of apps that they aim to, be good for.
Yeah.
Like things that do this, like Unity, for example, Unity just crushes it in terms of adoption because it's clear. It's like this is for like 3D video games and then like some subset of 2D video games. And they're not like, yeah, we're an app development framework that happens to be.
Yeah,
You know what I
exactly.
mean?
They are very specialized on this, and then when you want to make a mobile game, you don't really need to weight the options like you go with Unity because it's
Right.
so much powerful than the
Yeah.
others.
So I think other frameworks will do something similar, and they'll be
Mhm.
like, well, this is actually really good. Like this has opinions about like networking and data fetching and building like
Yes.
online and connected apps.
Mhm.
And then it'll be like something like Swift and the first party tools will be more generalized. And then maybe another tool comes up and it's like, this is really good at these like offline, local type applications. Like if something's very canvassy, there's frameworks for that as well.
Yes.
So I think those niches will form more clearly, and people will think less in terms of app framework and like, basically the same division as like an app or a game. They'll think that for like online and offline type things.
Yeah, and they will have like go-to frameworks and tools for the type of app that they want to build.
Right.
Something
Yeah.
like this.
Like there's
Cool.
some stigma around like using web views in a native app.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, but there are some things that web views are just really fantastic at, like rich text editing. Like if you think about it, a web view
Mhm.
is basically the ultimate rich text, like the final boss of rich text editing.
That's right.
And if you're not using it, then you're effectively recreating it, and you're like implementing all these like various styling formats, and you just know what you're missing when you try to render
Mhm.
Markdown. People like. Yeah, I mean, effectively, it feels like that if you've ever tried to do something. When you start to split things up into different categories, then I think it goes even further into different types of components. And you start to look like, all right, how am I building this component compared to this other component? Because like a camera app is very optimized for not just like iPhone or Android. It's usually very like optimized for the exact camera on that model of an iPhone. Right, like
Right, yeah, yeah.
hardware-based apps are based on the hardware of that device, and not
Yeah.
just like the vendor that like operates it.
Exactly.
Whereas something like Twitter, like it's fine if text looks the same. You want text to look the same across platforms.
Mhm.
So I think like we'll go even further into the component layer. Where I think React stands apart is that it's very composable. It lets you be like, here's this component as a web view. This component's truly like native. This is like Swift UI view. This one
Mm-hmm.
other here is like Skia view. This one's just like a general cross-platform view, and you can stitch them together and compose them and ship libraries with them. So I think that will likely play out it'll just be like the best bet that you can make to go with, because you like as your priorities change and like the requirements of a project change, it's the only tool that can really like, keep up with you at that pace. Hopefully it stays that way because things change all
Yeah.
the time.
Yeah, it seems very versatile, and it allows it
I love that you had a word to summarize what took me so many more words.
Yeah, well, no, I think we definitely need the long explanation just to like envision it better, and
Yeah, I
yeah,
find it helps. Yeah.
it's great, and I love your perspective on it. And continuing on this idea, I think that it's important as a mobile developer to the capabilities of each of these frameworks and tools are, and then choose the right one for your scenario. So this would be kind of a skill that a mobile developer should have. Do you think about other skills that are necessary for what are some top skills that a mobile developer should have to like stay competitive and good as a developer?
Yeah, fantastic question. Very difficult. I think like when I'm building Expo, in my mind, I'm always thinking about like the indie developer and entrepreneurs, and then I'm also thinking about like large teams and like how you scale. Because ultimately, if you are an indie developer and very successful, you will get to this place.
Yes.
But really, like having a full understanding of the stack. Not getting too tied into the details. I mean, we were talking a little bit before this about how you like both got into iOS native development.
Yes.
When I did that, I was really into the details of like how core animation works and all the layers. And then I just had this very one-sided skill set where I didn't know much about servers or databases. That's all changed now. But for so long, there were just so many, because it's just user expectations have grown and what they expect out of an app and a service. Like companies just want people who are versatile and it can do a lot of different things. And so I think having a nice high level perspective, like, so if you build an app end to end, you set out to make something, really get out of your comfort zone as much as you can. Something that's really helped me as a native developer was getting into React Native, because it exposed me to the web community, where you have to think about like the compilation, things like Babel and transformation, and like the whole deployment CI process. A lot of these things Apple has solutions for, and they're closed source. Like it's hard to look in how to like optimize build speeds and times. So you kind of just lean on like, oh, well, it's slow, but like there's nothing we can really do about it. And so getting into maybe more of the open source space really helps you to like peel back the layers as necessary. And then that's going to just, I think, give developers a lot of what they need to succeed in a lot of different types of scenarios. I said the thing about core animation, but if you are really good at like animation and UI and optimizing UI, there are jobs out there for that. Same with like build times and profiling. Trying to try to build something for yourself and like, just make side projects. Like practice makes perfect. Definitely, I would say find motivation to enjoy coding. Like I love writing software. We were at the after party last night, and then I like left to go write software because I was talking to so many smart engineers. I was like, I want to go do that. This
Yeah,
is more
just
like
got pumped from the ideas, right?
exactly right. You get nerd sniped, and yeah,
Mhm.
like figure out how to get into that type of mindset, and it'll be perpetual at that time. Like you make yourself better, and you won't even realize it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that answer because I could see it over the course of my career, like how side projects helped me to get a better understanding of, as you mentioned, like APIs and the server side, and not just becoming very specialized. But that can also work if you are very specialized at something in native iOS or in native Android. But I think you said it right that companies now are looking for people who know like multiple things, and they are kind of maybe master of one and know the basics of others.
Yeah.
So.
I will say in the cross-platform world, I do think it matters more to know web plus a native platform more than it matters to know multiple different native platforms. So I
Right.
think if you know, like, if you're an iOS developer, learn web development, or Android, like, also learn web development, right? And then that will really pad out your ability to do like the end-to-end full stack for like a single platform, because iOS developers use the web. iOS developers maybe not use like Android phones, but Android developers then also use the web. And then that will even scale out the ability, the types of native apps you can build. Because there's a lot of things like universal links, which kind of get pushed to the wayside by native developers because they do require a deep integration with both web and native
Yeah.
to like align your links so that if you open a web page, it goes to the native app. And same with like shared passwords. These are things that like people might add in, but then they break accidentally and they don't, and you need them to be like, solid.
Especially important, yeah, in the cross-platform, and I think this is a good takeaway, that as you said, if you know a native platform, then learning web would bring you like many more benefits than
Yeah.
like just learning the other native platform also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've taken so much away from like learning from the web community, especially at Expo, when it was just originally it was iOS and Android. And then I introduced the web platform, and it's just been like opening this pipeline of incredible innovation coming from just this, there's so much centralized open source knowledge that's being poured into the web community. And you can just take those learnings and it's like free. You just take it to these other platforms. People are like, this is incredible. And it's like, right, yeah, it's
You're not
actually
used
common
to that,
practice on the
yeah.
web space. But yeah, it's like, yeah.
How was your journey with Expo so far? And
My journey with Expo. So I found Expo. I was doing like native development, and then I was at a consultancy. We needed to just move faster and faster. And I'm a pretty fast developer, but it still just wasn't good enough. And so found other tools, like other cross-platform tools, but they always had like these hard limitations. And React Native was a really nice balance where you could move really quickly and then incrementally drop down to finer grain. And then also it had OTA updates, which was just so killer.
yeah,
like
that is
yeah,
like
if
the
we're working with
best
clients,
things about it.
right? Yeah, we could like get the Expo Go app on people's phones and then send it to them. They'd instantly be able to like preview it. It was amazing. And so then I quit that job and joined Expo and have been working on just making it the best way to build apps like imaginable. And so we've added the web platform. We're introducing the server platform, server components, and really trying to pad out this idea of write once, run everywhere, but for things which like people want to write once and run everywhere. So for instance, animations and interactions, people really like that those feel like native to the platform they're on. And for me, as like coming from a design background, a front end background, I definitely prefer I find that more fun and enjoyable to like create UIs multiple times. But things like data fetching and getting authentication right and the redirects and error handling and waterfalls and code signing and like server deployment and like versioning, these are problems that people are totally okay with having solved once and working everywhere. So Expo specializes in solving those issues and like helping you to focus on like whatever type of development you're doing across all these other platforms. I think we're doing fantastic with that. With this new project, Expo Router, which is a file-based routing system that works across platforms, is our most recent thing, and has like really fantastic reception. Even native developers like this, very intuitive. I think there's a very non-zero chance, very good chance that it becomes like a mainstream practice that we then see ups in like Apple
across
and Google.
mobile development in general.
Yeah, just in the same way that like composable, declarative, reactive frameworks have kind of started with React Native and become the default. And like they have Swift UI and Jetpack Compose, and Flutter, and like everything is doing. I think file-based routing, there's a chance it like is like that as well because there's so much you can do with being able to statically analyze all the routes in your app. Like you can take screenshots and test automatically because you can just launch all the links. Like,
and it also feels intuitive in my opinion because you can just look at the structure and there you have it. And
right. Yeah.
It's intuitive and
yeah.
I wish it comes to native as well.
Yeah, it is on native if you use Expo, but I know what you mean. There's something very human-centered about the design of file-based routing, where once you have it and then you try to go back, then everything just feels like a canvas, like you're just drawing to the screen. But when you actually have like baked-in navigation structure, you're like, oh, this is an app. It's just a single-paged app, and if I add another page, I have 2 pages, right? Which is more in line with how I think a lot of different types of apps work. I think there are a lot of apps that are okay with being this like draw to the screen type canvassy solution. Video games are a great example. You want to draw everything custom. Like you start to see the forking of like different types of apps form where it's like, it's a no-brainer that navigation would be baked in and that it would be central to your app development experience. And then server components is another one that I think is going to be just massively huge. Like very convinced that one will be like, there will be upstream solutions for those, first party, whatever vendor solutions for those as well. because the ability to render some of your UI dynamically switching between server and client, and then like encapsulating the ability to like version and make API routes platform specific, like just server code, is unparalleled. Like you think about like authentication, for example, you have it just like touches on so many things. You're going to web to native in a web browser, and then you got to like link back, and then you make an API request. You get like a secret token. You like pass it down. All of that can be encapsulated and represented as a single component that you can just install and ship, and it's like that actually gets you over the finish line with a lot of functionality. I'm really excited for that coming to Expo, which we'll probably have an early preview out by like end of this year, early next year. And then for the whole community to have something like that as well. Like just every human on earth to have access to that type of functionality, I think is going to be really game changing.
For sure. And that authentication example, I think it's perfect because that's something that requires like so many different operations like linked together, and then to just have that and use it.
And so many people need authentication, right?
But most apps out there.
And this like scales out to really any sort of network request where you do want to like get some data, handle all the validation, handle all of the like hydration states and stuff, and then display it and like have some beautiful UI behind it. And we just haven't had, at least in the native world, some really intuitive like end-to-end way to compose like server code and client code together. It's going to be huge. It's going to open a lot of doors, probably. Like, I mean, it's the kind of thing where, you know, when we have React Native, people like, if you have like 3 teams of people and you're like, yeah, you could kind of do what they do, but now just like on your own as like an indie developer, people will be like, oh, but then like a lot of people are out of the job. And it's like, not really. Like what we found is that everyone on the team will then just do what everyone on the team was doing. Like they'll all, and then you just kind of see productivity generally increase. I think the server stuff moves the needle in maybe an even greater way, where you have this front end, back end team, which are usually 2 distinct teams. But unlike an iOS and an Android team, which can kind of work in silos, the front end, back end team need to work like together all the time to keep things working. And so being able to like have a solution where a single developer can like at least have part of the front end or part of the back end inside of their code is going to be really powerful. Increase productivity, hard to predict ways.
But definitely in a positive way.
In positive ways. We can predict positively.
For sure, I think like developers will find maybe even more joy in what they do, and they'll see their impact better than before, like greater impact than before.
One thing I've seen with the server stuff is a lot of new developers not fans of servers.
No.
And so they hear about this and they're like, I don't love servers, so I don't love this idea. But it's quite contrary to that, where when I'm doing, you know, front end development, I like to be in that mode, and server components allow you to just glide through the server code, right? Because you're writing it with the same language features and your same application right next to your front end code. And so you're able to very intuitively go from, you know, nothing to JSON from a remote endpoint on the screen. And then now you spend the rest of the day just styling that, animating that, you know, like building out the presentation and the interaction of that content. And the server part just kind of melts into the background. It becomes part of the state machine, the routing. It's actually really, native developers will probably benefit more than web developers ever could have. Like, it's just incredible, like, being able to bring this level of finesse to native platforms. A little excited about it.
I'm excited too, and can't wait to see like how this goes on, like towards the end of the year, as you said,
definitely.
early next year. I'd like to ask you some things about tech conferences, since we're meeting at one right now. And when talking about tech conferences in general, what do you think? Key ingredients to a good one, to a great event?
I think lots to do. Like, you don't want to go to an event and then like you've done definitively everything in like a short amount of time, and then you spend hours on it. So this Conference React Summit does this really well. I think there's actually a lot of really great conferences that are doing this. I mean, this one's so hard to plan for, so it's just more of like but just having like really, really smart people around, like fantastically incredible people everywhere. Like there's nothing else quite like it. And that's like the main reason I want to come to conferences. You go to and you'll be like, I know like I'm familiar with all this work, and then the people who I don't know, it's like you talk to them and they're like incredibly
Yeah.
smart. You're like excited, like maybe they're working on something super interesting and they've thought of things that you never thought of before. And key to doing that is you got to like talk to people. So you got to reach outside
Right.
your comfort zone and interact with people, which is hard for everyone, but makes it worth it.
I think especially for people who are going to their first tech conferences, because I remember when I first went to some tech conferences, I was thinking that I'll learn a lot of things from the presentations, which was true. But in my mind, I was shy to reach out to people or to go and join conversations. And over time, I learned that actually that's one of the great things about conferences, that you meet people and you can exchange ideas, and as you said, maybe discover something that you didn't thought about before, or yeah, just build those connections and see where they take you, right? So
Yeah, I definitely just joining conversations. I think people, I personally find it hard, but then when I'm at a conference and I know it's just a bunch of really smart developers, what's the worst that like you're going to be maybe awkward or like silent, but you're talking to people who have the most empathy for that because they feel this way as well,
yes,
right?
exactly,
So
right.
like,
And people in general are very open and friendly at
right.
conferences, and also speakers. Like you are a speaker here, and it's a pleasure talking to you already. And I'm sure from a speaker point of view, you can say to people who are earlier in their careers and go to conferences that speakers are also happy to talk to the public, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I highly encourage it. If there are people who want to talk to me, doesn't matter what's going on, like you should come up and say hi. I mean, I can't speak for all speakers, but I think a lot of, yeah, for me personally, I just speak to try and like spread the message of what we're building, but I am primarily a software developer. I spend like 90% of my day writing like code. And so for me, like getting to hear about how people are using that code or like maybe why they're not using the code is fantastic. Like I love hearing about it. I love talking about software. So being at a tech conference, you really get, it's not like anywhere else. Like if you go to a restaurant, you try to cold approach someone like anything, any number of things you have, but at a tech conference, it's like very likely to have a very positive outcome.
For sure, yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's also a bit more personal than just maybe going through articles and forums, and because that's helpful as well, but when you're here, like you can have that human connection with the other
Definitely.
people.
Yeah, there's lots of interesting things, especially people who are developing stuff want to say. Because I'll use myself as an example. I am not a writer, so I do not write out all of my thoughts. Like I'll make releases about posts, but then there's just a bunch of ideas that I have that are not like post worthy, where I want to edit it. And yeah, so like I love sharing that with people. And if you find me and talk in real life, then I'll just tell you like everything on my mind. So I think there's lots of engineers like that. I was talking with Evan Yu and Anthony Fu, who work on Vite and Vue last night, and just hearing like tons and tons of fantastic information from them. Like members of the React team are also fantastic. Like I personally get a lot of value out of this. I highly recommend other people give it a try as well. So like reach outside of your comfort zone, talk to people. I'm very confident it will work out.
Yes, that's the way, I'm sure.
Yeah.
What do you think about React Summit so far? How do you like it?
Yeah, fantastic. Hits all the points that I just outlined. I think like
It checks all the boxes,
yeah, I
right?
think, yeah, it's checking those boxes. Great venue, cool area. You know, Amsterdam is like pretty hard to beat, and yeah, lots of super smart, talented people. I'm just looking like even behind the camera, I see these talented people who are like, and yeah, I'm grateful to be here and like be able to like have the opportunity to talk with all these people.
You mentioned about meeting some people last evening, and one particular thing about like the React Summit and these conferences are like they have an after party where developer can connect. What do you think about that?
If you find it hard to connect sober, after party, great time to network.
It boosts your courage, right? It makes you more courageous.
There is time for that, and it will come. So don't feel like you missed your opportunity. You can always network there as well. Maybe not for everyone, but for some people, definitely a lot easier.
Definitely. Yeah, I also think it's a good idea, and yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Evan, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
You as well.
Radiate a lot of positive energy, and I can see that you're very passionate about what you're doing. And please, continue to spread this passion with the developer community out there and build amazing things.
Oh yeah, thank you. It was great talking.
Yep.
Yeah. Do one of those.